Don't come closer. I don't need Savon. Not from you or anyone. The wind on the Wyoming plain blew hard enough to strip paint from wood, and it carried with it the kind of cold that settled into bones and stayed there for months. Dust lifted off the cracked boards of the Dry Creek depot like smoke from a dying fire. The freight station sat empty most days, a leftover from when the rails meant something, when commerce and hope ran together through this stretch of hardscrabble land. Now it was just weathered timber and rusted metal, groaning in the wind, waiting for a storm that everyone could smell coming. Jonas Hale arrived just after noon, riding slowly on a horse that knew the way without instruction. He was the type of man the land had carved into something lean and deliberate. His coat hung dust-colored and worn, his hat older than most marriages. He carried the kind of quiet that made folks uneasy because they couldn't read what was behind it. He'd spent years in the hills above the valley, and the hills had taught him that silence was safer than any word ever spoken. He wasn't there for work. There was nothing at Dry Creek Depot that required his attention. Jonas just needed to refill his canteen before heading back into the high country, where the only sounds were wind and his own breathing. Water, then gone. That was the plan, simple and clean. He was tying his horse to the weathered post when he saw her. Mira Boone sat on the back steps of the station, coat wrapped so tight it looked like armor against the world. Her hair had come loose from its binding and moved with the wind like something separate from her body. But it was her eyes that made him stop, red-rimmed and swollen, the kind of eyes that told their own story without needing words. She'd been crying. Hard. And she was doing everything she could to hide it. Jonas turned toward the station's side entrance, where the water pump was located. He wasn't in the habit of involving himself in other people's pain. That was a road that led nowhere good, nowhere he wanted to travel. But he'd only taken 3 steps when her voice cut through the wind. Don't come closer. Sharp. Broken at the edges. I don't need Savon. Not from you or anyone. He stopped. She still wasn't looking at him, just staring out at the plains like she could see all the way to the edge of the world and didn't much like what she found there. Jonas stood there for a long moment, considering. Most men would have left. Most men would have respected that kind of warning and moved on. Most men didn't know what to do with a woman sitting alone on depot steps, telling them to stay away. Jonas wasn't most men. He didn't move forward. But he didn't leave either. He just stood there, a few paces back, letting the wind move around them both. The sky above was turning the color of old bruises, purple and gray mixing together, heavy with the promise of snow. The temperature was dropping. Anyone with sense could feel it. Depot's closed, he said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse, sandpaper against silence. Storms moving in fast. She finally looked at him then, just a glance over her shoulder, and for a moment her jaw tightened even more. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, more controlled, but there was still a tremor underneath. I said I'm fine. Jonas sat down on an old crate that lay near the steps. Not close. Not distant. Just present. Close enough that she'd know she wasn't unseen. Far enough that she could breathe. Don't look at it, he said. That cracked something in her. She turned away before he could see the wetness gathering again in her eyes, but it was too late. The damage was done. She'd been seen, and in a town like this, being seen was almost as bad as being judged. Why do you care, Jonas? Her voice came out sharp, defensive. You don't even talk to people. You keep to the hills. Everyone knows it. You come down, get what you need, and disappear back up into the quiet. So why are you sitting here? Jonas didn't answer right away. He was the kind of man who understood that silence could be an answer too. He looked out at the plains, at the dust devils spinning in the distance, at the way the light was changing as the storm approached. When he finally spoke, his words were sparse and true. Doesn't mean I don't see them. She turned to face him then, eyes still wet but anger mixing with something else now, something that looked almost like confusion. Mira Boone had spent the last 6 months believing that if people saw her, they would judge her. The town had made sure of that. Whispers followed her like shadows. Poor Mira, they said. Better off alone. Her husband disappeared and left her with nothing but debts and shame. Some women were just born to lose everything. She'd started believing it. But Jonas's words sat differently than the whispers. They didn't carry judgment in them. They just carried facts. He saw her. That was all. Everyone in town thinks I'm chasing another man, she said quietly. After what happened with William. After he left. Jonas didn't flinch at the name. William Boone had disappeared 5 months ago, leaving behind a wife, a failed farm, and a note that most of the town had heard about through the usual channels, loose tongues and bad timing. The bank had seized the homestead 2 months after that. Mira had nothing left except work at the depot, sorting crates and counting hours. What does it matter what they think? Jonas asked. It matters, Mira said, and her voice cracked slightly. It matters because I'm trying to survive, and every time someone sees me talking to a man, any man, they assume the worst. They assume I'm desperate. They assume I'm broken. And the worst part is. She stopped, swallowed hard. The worst part is I'm starting to believe them. The wind picked up, rattling the station's loose boards. Snow would come soon. Real snow, the kind that buried everything and made travel impossible. Jonas stood up from the crate and walked over to the window, looking out at the sky. His shoulders were broad but narrow at the same time, the kind of frame that came from years of carrying your own weight and no one else's. You know why I stay in the hills, he said, still looking out at the darkening sky. Mira didn't answer. She was watching him now, really watching him, seeing something in his profile that she recognized, the look of someone who understood what it meant to be broken. Because 3 years ago, I brought my brother out into a blizzard worse than the one coming now. I was supposed to know the way. I was supposed to be able to get us both home. He turned to look at her then, and his eyes held something raw. I couldn't save him. Froze before we made it back to the shelter. And I've been telling myself ever since that I didn't deserve warm kitchens or soft voices or any kind of company that mattered. Mira stood up slowly. The depot was growing colder, and the light outside was fading fast. You were trying to save him, she said. That's different. Is it? Jonas asked. I was still wrong. Still failed. Still alone because of it. Over the next week, Jonas kept finding reasons to ride by the depot. He told himself it was the route he always took back from the supply merchant in town. He told himself the shortcut made sense, that it saved time. But the truth sat heavier than the lies, he was looking for her. And Mira, working alone in the cold, found herself watching the road more than she watched her work. When she saw the dust cloud rising behind his horse, something shifted in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or fear. She couldn't quite name it, and that uncertainty kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the small room she rented above the general store. Their conversations were short. Careful. 2 people burned by life, convinced they were better off untouched. On the second day, Jonas rode up while Mira was stacking freight crates near the loading ramp. The wind was bitter, and her fingers were turning red with cold. She'd lost her gloves somewhere during the move from the homestead. Weather's turning worse, he said, dismounting slowly. Storm's still coming, she replied, not looking at him. Won't be here for another few days. Could be sooner. She finally turned to face him. His coat was dusted with snow that hadn't been falling an hour ago. You're always this cheerful, Jonas. Just practical. But he helped her move the remaining crates into the station's dry storage anyway, working quietly beside her. When their hands nearly touched, reaching for the same box, she pulled away. He pretended not to notice. On the fourth day, they talked about the telegraph line that had run through Dry Creek 15 years ago, before the rails shifted routes and left the town behind. Mira had read about it in old station records she was organizing. Jonas had actually seen it functioning, back when he was younger and still believed in progress. They said it would connect us to the rest of the world, Mira said, holding a stack of yellowed papers. Make us important. It did, for a while, Jonas said. Then the world moved on to somewhere else. That seems to be the story around here. There was no bitterness in her voice this time. Just acknowledgement. Recognition. Understanding. On the fifth day, Mira mentioned her husband's name without flinching. Just said it in passing. William had hated the telegraph line, thought it was a waste of money. Jonas listened but didn't ask questions. The details would come when they were ready, if they came at all. Beneath every word they exchanged sat the weight of wounds neither dared reveal. Mira feared the town's judgment and what it meant that she had started believing their whispers. Jonas feared what it meant that he was beginning to want something beyond the hills. He was beginning to want morning coffee with someone. He was beginning to want to be seen. By the seventh day, Mira had started leaving coffee for him when she saw him riding in. By the seventh day, Jonas had started staying longer than was reasonable, talking about small things, weather patterns, the names of birds in the high country, the way snow sounded different at different temperatures. They were building something without naming it. Something that felt dangerous in its quietness, its inevitability. Two people learning that solitude wasn't safety. It was just another kind of wound. And the storm was still coming. One evening, as the sun dropped low and turned the sky the color of old blood, Mira was moving crates on the loading ramp. The wooden boards were slick with ice that had formed during the afternoon thaw and refroze when the temperature dropped. She'd been careful all day, testing each step, but exhaustion makes mistakes for everyone. Her boot caught on a raised edge of warped wood. For a moment, she felt the shift in her center, that sickening knowledge that the ground was about to betray her. Then she was falling, hard, her hip and shoulder taking the impact against the edge of a crate. Pain shot through her like lightning. The wind knocked clean out of her lungs. She lay there for a second, stunned, trying to remember how to breathe. Then Jonas was there, his hands reaching for her arms, his voice steady and close. Don't move yet. Can you feel your legs? She nodded, gasping. Of course, she could feel them. She could feel everything, the cold of the loading ramp seeping through her coat, the sharp pain in her hip, the humiliation burning hotter than any injury. I can stand, she said, her voice trembling with anger more than pain. I'm fine. I know you can stand. Not right now, though. She grabbed his wrists and pushed his hands away. Hard. Harder than was fair, but fairness had left her life 6 months ago, along with everything else. Don't save me, she snapped, her voice shaking with something that looked like fury but sounded like breaking. People already think I'm weak. That I couldn't hold on to my husband. That I couldn't hold on to the land. That I'm pathetic and desperate and waiting for some man to fix what got broken. I don't need that. I don't need you doing that. Jonas didn't argue. He didn't try to convince her or explain, or soften the truth. He simply lifted her anyway, slow, steady, careful, the way you'd lift something precious that was hurting. He held her against his chest, and even through her anger and her shame and her desperate need to prove she didn't need anyone, she could feel how still he was. How certain. How unmovable. She didn't resist this time. Her breath trembled against his shirt. His coat smelled like horse and dust, and pine from the high country. For just a moment, she let herself be held. I can stand on my own, she whispered, the fight draining out of her voice. I know, Jonas answered, his voice close to her ear. But no one stands all the time. Everyone falls. Everyone needs someone to hold them while they figure out how to get back up. He set her down slowly, keeping his hands on her back until he was sure she was steady. She was shaking, from cold or shock or something deeper, she couldn't tell. "Your shoulder's going to bruise badly," he said, looking at where she'd hit the crate. "Come inside. It's getting colder." She wanted to refuse. Every part of her that had learned to survive alone wanted to send him away, to prove that she didn't need him. But another part of her, the part that had been crying on the depot steps less than 2 weeks ago, knew the truth. She was tired of being strong. She was tired of being alone. She was tired of believing that accepting help was the same as admitting defeat. "All right," she said quietly. They went inside together, and for the first time, neither of them pushed the other away. The station's interior was dim and cold, but it offered shelter from the wind that was picking up outside. Jonas built a fire in the old stove while Mira sat on a wooden chair, testing her shoulder carefully. The bruising was already starting, dark purple blooming under her skin like something alive. She watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements. No wasted effort. No hesitation. Just a man who knew how to do things and did them without fanfare. He'd brought in kindling and wood from the covered stack outside, arranged it with practiced hands, and within minutes had heat radiating through the station. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words felt strange in her mouth, like something rusty that hadn't been used in a long time. "Don't need thanks." Still. He turned to face her then, and in the firelight, she could see the lines in his face more clearly, the kind of lines that came from years of squinting at horizons, from carrying weight no one else could see. She wondered how many winters he'd spent alone in the hills. How many times had he sat by a fire just like this one with no one to talk to? "Mira," he said, and hearing her name in his voice felt like something shifting. "What happened to you wasn't your fault." She looked away. "You don't know what happened. I know William left you. I know the bank took the land. I know the town's been talking about you like you're something broken that got discarded." He paused. "But I don't know the rest of it. The part that made you believe them." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind was howling now, rattling the station's old bones. The storm was closer than anyone had expected. Mira pulled her coat tighter around herself, not from cold but from the weight of the decision she was facing. "Tell him or don't. Stay guarded or risk something real." "He left me a note," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't just disappear as everyone thinks. He left a note on the kitchen table saying he wasn't coming back. That I was broken. That he couldn't fix me, and he wasn't going to spend his life trying." Jonas didn't move. He just listened, the way he always did. "I believed him," Mira continued, and now her voice cracked. "Not right away. But after the bank took everything, after the town started whispering, I started thinking maybe he was right. Maybe I am broken. Maybe there's something in me that just fails. That breaks things. That ruins everything it touches." She finally looked at him. "Is that what you think? When you look at me?" "No," Jonas said. He pulled the chair closer to the fire, closer to her. "I think you're someone who got left by a coward. I think you're someone the world has been hard on. But I don't think you're broken." "How can you be sure?" "Because broken people don't keep showing up. They don't keep working. They don't sit alone on depot steps and refuse help because they're too proud to let anyone think they need it." He leaned back slightly. "That's not broken. That's just strong. That's just stubborn. That's just human." The fire burned brighter. The station warmed. Outside, snow began to fall, soft at first, then harder, covering the Wyoming plains in white. Neither of them moved to close the shutters or prepare for what was coming. They just sat there, two people who had learned that isolation was safer than connection, beginning to understand that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay. "I don't know if I believe that yet," Mira said finally. "But I want to." "That's enough," Jonas replied. "That's more than enough." The snow fell heavily as the hours passed. It piled against the station windows, muffling the world outside. Jonas kept the fire going, adding wood at regular intervals, never letting the warmth drop. Myra's shoulder had stiffened, and she moved carefully, but the physical pain seemed smaller now than it had been. There were other kinds of hurt, she was learning, that took longer to acknowledge. She watched him tend the fire, then moved to check the station supplies. He knew where everything was, working as though he'd memorized this place long ago. There was something calming about his presence, the opposite of chaos. He didn't fill silences with empty words or expect her to perform happiness she didn't feel. He just existed beside her, and somehow that was enough. "Tell me about your brother," she said. The question came out before she could think about whether it was wise to ask. Jonas went still. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he sat down across from her, and his voice came out quiet and measured, like something he'd practiced saying but never quite got right. His name was Michael. He was younger. Better with people than I ever was. He could walk into a room and make folks feel like they mattered. Jonas stared at his hands. 3 years ago, we were coming down from the high country. The storm caught us faster than we'd predicted. Whiteout conditions. Couldn't see 10 feet in front of us. I thought I knew the way, thought I'd traveled it enough times that I didn't need to be careful. Mira didn't interrupt. She just listened. I was wrong. We got turned around. The cold was bad, the kind that stops your thinking. Michael was struggling to keep up. I kept telling him we were almost there, just a little farther. I kept lying because I didn't want to admit I was lost. He looked up at her. When we finally made it back to the shelter, it was too late for him. His body had given out. Hypothermia. And it was because I was too proud to admit I'd made a mistake. Too stubborn to stop and figure out where we actually were. "That wasn't your fault," Mira said, echoing his words back to him. "Wasn't it?" Jonas asked. "I was supposed to know better. I was older. I was the one who'd done this route 100 times. I was responsible for keeping him alive, and I failed." "You were lost in a blizzard," Mira said, her voice firm now. "You were trying to survive. You didn't kill him, Jonas. The storm did. The cold did. Bad luck did. But not you." He looked at her for a long time. In the firelight, his face was shadowed, weathered, but there was something different in his eyes now. Like he was seeing himself through her gaze instead of his own. "After that," Jonas continued, "I told myself I didn't deserve anything good. No warm place. No kind words. No one to care about. I went into the hills, and I stayed there because I figured if I wasn't around people, I couldn't hurt them. Couldn't fail them. Couldn't let them down. But you came back," Mira said. "You came to the depot. You kept coming back. Because I saw you," he said simply. "And I recognized something. Someone who was doing the same thing I was. Punishing themselves for things that weren't their fault. Believing the worst about themselves because it felt safer than believing they deserved better." The snow continued to fall outside, thick and relentless. The station was warm now, a small island of light and heat in the gathering darkness. "I don't want to punish myself anymore," Mira whispered. "Neither do I," Jonas replied. The snow fell all through the night. By midnight, it was waist-deep against the station's doors, and the wind had taken on a sound like nothing human, something primal and ancient, the voice of the land itself determined to erase everything that didn't belong to it. Mira dozed fitfully in a chair near the fire, her injured shoulder making it impossible to find any position that didn't hurt. Jonas sat nearby, keeping the stove fed, listening to the storm. Around 3 in the morning, she woke shivering. "The lantern oil," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "It's running low. I should have refilled it yesterday, but I forgot." Jonas checked the oil lamp that hung near the station's front window. She was right. Maybe 6 hours worth left, less if they needed the light to stay bright. After that, they'd be in darkness with nothing but the fire. "How long until this storm breaks?" Mira asked. "Can't tell from inside. It could be another day. Could be 2. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. The wind was howling harder now, and the temperature inside the station had begun to drop again. The fire was fighting a losing battle against the cold that was seeping through every crack and crevice. "We should leave. We should try to ride out before it gets worse." "Not safe," Jonas said flatly. "Can't see 10 feet in front of us. We'd get turned around just like Michael and I did. Except this time there's no shelter to find." Mira stood up, pain shooting through her shoulder, and walked to the window. Outside was nothing but white, swirling, endless white that erased the world. She pressed her hand against the glass and felt the cold radiating through, felt how fragile the barrier between them and the storm really was. "I'm scared," she admitted. The words came out small, and she didn't try to take them back or soften them. There was no point in pretending anymore. Jonas came to stand beside her. Not touching, but close. "I know. What if the oil runs out and we're stuck in the dark? Then we'll be stuck in the dark together." She turned to look at him. His face was weathered and lined, but his eyes were steady. She realized, in that moment, that she believed him. Not because he was promising to fix things or save the day or make the storm go away. He wasn't promising any of that. He was just promising to be there. To not leave. To sit in the darkness with her if that's what happened. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to let someone stay." "You just do," Jonas replied. "You stop pushing them away. You let them see you. You trust that being broken together is better than being broken alone." She reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused from years of work and living, and it was warm. Real. Present. She held it like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. "What happens when the storm ends?" she asked. "When we leave this place and have to go back out there?" "I don't know," Jonas said honestly. "But I know I'm not going back to the hills. Not if you're not there." The wind screamed against the station walls. The fire crackled and popped. The oil lamp burned steadily, marking time with its small, precious light. And in that narrow space between the storm and the fire, between the cold and the warmth, 2 people who had spent years running from connection finally stopped running. They sat together through the rest of the night, and when the lantern oil began to run low, neither of them panicked. The fire was enough. Each other was enough. Morning came like a mercy. The wind stopped first, dropping from a howl to a whisper to silence. The snow stopped next, leaving behind a world so white and clean it looked scrubbed to nothing. Light came through the station windows, pale and cold and beautiful. Jonas was already awake when Mira opened her eyes. He'd kept the fire alive through the night, feeding it carefully, making sure it never died completely. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but there was something else there too, something that looked like peace. She stood slowly, her shoulder throbbing but manageable. The station was bitterly cold, but not the deadly cold of the previous night. They could survive this. They would survive this. "We made it," she said. "We did." Jonas looked out at the snow-buried landscape, then back at her. "The drifts are too deep to ride through today. We're stuck here another night at least. Maybe 2. Mira nodded. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. Another day. Another night. More time in this small space where the rest of the world couldn't reach them. We need fuel, she said practically. And food. I think there are some stores in the back room. They worked through the morning, moving carefully around each other. Jonas repaired the station's old stove, tightening loose bolts and clearing the chimney pipe. Mira found coffee, beans, and some hardtack that was probably older than either of them. She made a weak broth and strong coffee, and they sat together on the floor near the fire, eating like they hadn't eaten in days. It was nothing dramatic. No grand declarations. No kiss. No promises spoken aloud about forever. Just two people deciding, quietly and deliberately, that they didn't have to heal alone. By afternoon, the sun was bright enough to hurt the eyes. Jonas went outside and came back covered in snow, reporting that the road south was beginning to clear. The main route toward town would be passable by tomorrow, maybe the day after. They could leave. But they didn't talk about leaving. Instead, they talked about staying. I could fix up the depot, Jonas said. Make it livable. The station master's cottage out back is mostly sound. Could patch the roof before winter gets worse. You'd stay here? Mira asked. Leave the hills. The hills will be there if I need them, Jonas said. But I don't think I need them the same way anymore. I don't think I'm running from things. I think I was just waiting for the right reason to stop. Mira looked at her hands. They were cracked and roughened from work, marked by a life that had been harder than fair. I don't know if I can do this, she said. I don't know if I can trust that this stays good. That you stay. I don't know either, Jonas admitted. But I know I want to try. I know I'm tired of being alone. I know that watching you work in the cold makes me want to be there. And I know that sitting with you through a storm felt more like home than anywhere I've ever been. Mira reached across and took his hand again. In the daylight, without the desperation of the storm, the gesture felt even more meaningful. A choice, not a comfort. A beginning, not an ending. All right, she said. We can try. They didn't know what came next. They didn't know if it would work or fail, if they'd be able to keep the tenderness they'd found, or if the world would wear it away. The Wyoming plains were still hard. Life was still hard. But in that small station at Dry Creek, warmed by a fire they'd kept alive together, two broken people had learned something that mattered. Something that had nothing to do with rescue or saving. Something that had everything to do with choosing to stay. That was courage. In a land as harsh as the Wild West, that choice was its own kind of bravery. If you love Jonas and Myra's story, subscribe for more gritty Western tales. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And let us know in the comments, do you believe two broken people can truly heal together? Thanks for watching.